A very good evening to all of you. Today, the topic for our session is Research in Palliative Care, Increasing the Odds of Publication. We, the organizing team of IAPCON 2022, feel grateful to have such eminent personalities for our session. I hope you all will like the session. The chairpersons for our faculty are Dr. Ravi Verma. He is the additional professor at Achyuta Menon Center for Health Sciences, Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute for Medical Sciences and Technology, Trivandrum, and Dr. Santosh K. Chaturvedi, sir, consultant psychiatrist in Leicester Partnership NHS Trust, UK. Currently, he is the former dean and head of NIMHANS Bangalore, having 125 publications, editor-in-chief of Journal of Psychosocial Rehabilitation and Mental Health, and author of book Clinical Psycho-Oncology. Words are too short to describe such a personality. I request Chairperson 1, Dr. Ravi Prasad Verma, to please introduce the speakers.
Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon, Catherine. I am Ravi, and I thank Pooja for introducing me as well as my co-chairperson, Dr. Santosh Chaturvedi.
Thank you, sir.
It is indeed a very big pleasure to be part of this very interesting session, to listen to all the speakers and as well as be part of this much larger conference in a very small way. I thank the organizers for the opportunity given to me. I also thank the team lead, Dr. Raghavendra, and once again the moderator, Dr. Pooja, for organizing and keeping in touch with all of us and helping us navigate through this session in these difficult times. Is there a speaker bio presentation that is going to be projected?
Please, tech team, please have the series slides for all the speakers.
The session is titled Research in Palliative Care, Increasing the Odds of Publication. We live in a world which is, can be described as publish or perish. So I've come across a lot of practitioners in palliative care doing excellent work, but if the work is not published and shared with the wider medical and health community, it's not counted as getting done. This session, I believe, is extremely important, and we have very eminent speakers here. I'm looking forward to hearing from them, as well as the co-chairperson, what they have to say. So we have 5 speakers in this session. So let me just list out the speakers and the sessions. I hope by that time the bio presentation with the brief bio will be displayed. We have Dr. Catherine Walsh. I hope I got the name correct, pronouncing it correct, who is going to speak to us for 25 minutes about gaps in palliative care research, asking the right question. After that, we go on to Dr. Raghavendra, who will talk to us for 20 minutes about appropriate design and methodology. We then have Dr. Rakesh Garg, who will talk to us for another 20 minutes about basic statistics and analysis. That's my cup of tea, being an epidemiologist. And then we have Dr. Jennifer Jeba, who has joined, and she will be telling about writing well, sharing the research story. Yes, it's about getting the science, getting the stats right, but ultimately there's a need to tell your story in a coherent way, which people can understand. And Dr. Jennifer will be briefing us about that. And then we have Dr. Raghu Tota. He has also joined, I can see that, and he will be speaking to us for about 20 minutes on the editor's perspective, which is an extremely important, a very important step when the manuscript, the output of the research, gets translated into a paper in a peer-reviewed journal that others can read and understand. Dr. Pooja, do we have a
Yes, sir.
slide?
I think they are already displayed.
Unfortunately, I cannot
Let me
see
just
it on my screen. I think I can see. I'm sorry, I don't see the slide displayed yet. As Dr. Pooja had mentioned, my task is to briefly introduce the 5 speakers, and then I will hand over the platform to the speakers in the order that I've just listed out. And once we have the session, the presentations done with, we will have some time for questions. And at that stage, I think we will listen to Dr. Santosh Chaturvedi, who can help all of us put everything together in a very useful and meaningful way. Yes. Our first speaker is Dr. Catherine Walsh. She is a professor of palliative care at the International Observatory on End of Life. She has started out her career. She has started out as a nurse and then went on to obtain her PhD and has been engaged in palliative care research since 2002. So 20 years of experience. We are fortunate to have you here. Her areas of interest include research methods and dissemination of primary and community-based palliative care, as well as the role of volunteers in palliative care. She is an editor-in-chief of the journal Palliative Medicine, and she has numerous awards and honors, which I'm sure are much more than that is displayed. She is at present a treasurer and board member of the European Association of Palliative Care. So thank you, Dr. Walsh, for being part of this session. So what do I do now, Dr. Pooja? Do I introduce the next speaker immediately, or can I hand over the platform to Dr. Catherine?
So we will be introducing everybody in together, and then the videos will be started.
Okay.
I think CV slides are visible.
Yeah, I'm seeing Dr. Catherine's.
Yeah, it will be, the next will be displayed now.
And the session I mentioned is Gaps in Palliative Care Research, asking the right question. The next speaker is Dr. Raghavendra Ramanjulu. He is a lead consultant and head of the Pain, Palliative and Rehabilitation Medicine Department at the Aster Groups of Hospitals at Bangalore. He has 16 years of experience that he's bringing on board today. And his areas of interest include evidence-based palliative medicine, end-of-life care, extended care at home, and interdisciplinary management of complex pain syndromes. He is the editor-in-chief of Indian Journal of Palliative Care. And primarily his qualification is anesthesia, and then he's moved on to pain and palliative and rehabilitation medicine. He has numerous awards, honors, and is a fellow of various organizations, as we can see here. He has a fellowship in acute pain management, pain services, interventional pain practice, and is also a fellow of the Indian Academy of Pain Medicine. He too, has an MSc in palliative medicine from Cardiff, UK. As Dr. Pooja had mentioned, Dr. Raghavendra is on the way and will be joining very soon. His session is appropriate.
I'm already here. Sorry, I'm
thank
already
you, thank
here.
you.
Joined.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavendra, for joining.
Thank
well
you,
in time for your talk. And his session is on appropriate design and methodology. Can we move on to the bio of Dr. Rakesh Garg? Thank you. Dr. Rakesh Garg serves as the additional professor of the Department of Onco-Anesthesiology and Palliative Medicine at the AIIMS, New Delhi. Again, he has extensive experience of 20 years, of which 10 years are in palliative medicine. His areas of interest include onco-anesthesia, airway, and cancer, pain and palliative medicine, and research in these areas. He has extensively published in national and international journals, as well as authored many chapters in books. He has received several awards, including the e-Governance Award for Development of a Mobile App for Palliative Care. Once again, thank you, Dr. Rakesh Garg, for agreeing to be part of this session. Can we move on to, he'll be talking on basic biostatistics and analysis. And then we have Dr. Jennifer Jeba. She's the professor and head of the palliative care unit at the Christian Medical College and Hospital, Vellore. She has been in palliative care for the last 1.5 decades, extensive experience in primary palliative care, respiratory palliative care, communication skills, and ethics. She has a background in radiation therapy, but also is qualified in palliative medicine. She has again several honors, awards, and publications to her credit. She is the joint recipient of the Cicely Saunders Medal for top student in the Diploma in Palliative Medicine from Cardiff University. She's an honorary senior lecturer at the School of Medicine, Cardiff University, as well as providing editorial support to the journal BMJ Supportive and Palliative Care. Thank you, madam, for agreeing to be part of this session. Looking forward to hearing you talk about writing well, sharing the research story. Can I have the bio of the last speaker of the session? The last speaker for the day is Dr. Raghu S. Tota, who's a professor of palliative medicine at the Homi Bhabha National Institute, Mumbai. His areas of interest include cancer, pain, and palliative medicine. He has a fellowship in pain medicine from Singapore. He's a corresponding author of the first cancer pain management guidelines in our country. He's editorial board member of the Pain Physician Journal, the official journal of the ASIPP. He too has several honors, awards, and publications to his credit, like the Navaratna Award by Om Padmashali Seva Sangh, Vaidyaratna National Award, awarded the Guinness World Record certificate, and many other things to his credit. I think we are extremely lucky and happy to have you here to talk about the editor's perspective. That will be a kind of the session where all these things come together. Yeah, so these are the 5 speakers. Once again, I thank Dr. Santosh Chaturvedi. He was introduced by Dr. Pooja. So at the end of these 5 sessions, we can have questions, which I believe it will be useful to have the questions typed in the chat box, and then Dr. Santosh can lead us through the discussion at the end. Thank you once again, organizers, and over to the first speaker, Dr. Catherine Walsh.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk at the conference today. I'm bringing greetings to you from the International Observatory on End-of-Life Care at Lancaster University, where I'm a professor of palliative care, but also from the journal Palliative Medicine, where I'm editor-in-chief. And I bring both of those experiences to the talk that I'm giving today. The whole session today is called Research in Palliative Care, Increasing the Odds of Publication. And my focus today is not just on writing research questions, although we'll definitely talk about that too, but on what I look at as an editor when I'm assessing a submitted paper and what will increase the chance of success in publication that's related to the question asked and how this is framed. So, pretty much every research project and therefore publication starts with a bright idea. The challenge for you as a researcher is how to turn that bright research idea into a great research question. Study that appropriately and then write something for publication about that that makes sense to the editor, the reviewers, and of course the readers. So there are a number of different elements that we want to take account of when we're thinking around this bright idea. We'll talk much more about that later, but this is likely to include things such as the existing research, the policy context, relevant theories and concepts, and potentially the clinical issues that you'll face. To be honest though, the first thing you'll probably be aware of is the research problem, rather than having a well-articulated question. But the problem with a research problem is that there are so very many questions that could be asked, and sometimes you might want to ask more than one question. It could be where, why, who, what, how, which, when, or whom. I'm going to suggest that to maximise your chance of publication, you need to follow a structured approach to considering your question. So let's focus on questions. Now, much of what follows can be found in much more detail in a chapter of a book that I was lucky enough to be involved in editing the other year. And it's relatively easily available if you wanted to have a look at it. The paperback has just come out and I know it's available as an ebook, so you can look at it online. Now, whilst I'm involved in doing that, actually it's not my own writing that I want to recommend, but that of my colleague here at Lancaster, Dr. Sarah Brearley. And she's written an absolutely excellent chapter on developing research questions. And I'm going to be drawing on some of that in what I'm talking about now. So within that chapter, there is a 5-step approach to writing great and publishable research questions. So we're going to go through that step by step. So step 1 is defining the research question, the research problem, sorry. This means both describing the idea in more detail, but also, and I cannot emphasize enough how important this is, thinking through why it should be researched. Essentially, not every research problem can become a research question, and not every research question should be researched. So again, it's very important that we think that through. Again, this can be quite challenging because you can be quite wedded to a particular research idea and absolutely passionate about how important this is. But this isn't always shared by others. Sometimes they will ask the "so what" question. It's important to understand not only that they might not share your passion for a particular research area, but also about if they have some fundamental information about why it might be important or not important that you need to consider. And here it's critically important that you challenge assumptions. And by this, I mean your own assumptions. It's important because it's really easy to be blinkered about something that you're passionate about. And you need to challenge those assumptions. The worst place for those assumptions to be challenged is when you submit your paper to a journal and the editors or the reviewers cannot see why you might want to study an area or why it might be important. You also need to be clear about your assumptions if you're studying an intervention or a program or a service, and you want to be clear that you're asking the appropriate question for the stage of development. It's no good asking a question about effect, which is often what we really want to know, if the question should be about intervention development, for example. So again, I really often see as an editor people that are totally wedded to a research area, and that's great to see, but can't take off those blinkers to see and look at something dispassionately, and that is critically important. Step 2 is refining the research problem from your own knowledge. You use this to define the main phenomena with a clear and boundaried focus, thinking through why you want to know something and who will the research affect. There are 3 aspects that you can ask of this. The first is what we call the do ability or the feasibility of the project. You, as we've already said, might think it's the greatest question ever, but if it can't be studied practically, then the question is likely to require a rethink. The feasibility of the project, the doability, often is very challenging because we usually start research projects by thinking big and wanting to do everything. This is the size of the project that we might want to do. However, we usually need to think focused. Ask a question that is not only more specific and focused, but also possible. Here you can see we've gone from the big picture to focusing on something much more discrete, specific, and manageable. The second is the want to do ability, your own personal interests. Let's face it, doing research is hard work, complicated at times, and often takes quite a while from idea to funding, to doing, to writing. It's got to be something that you're interested in and passionate about. However, your personal passions are probably not going to sway an editor. It'll keep you going through the process, but you have to think about how you construct an argument that will bring people along with you. And the third is the significance and the ethics of the study, the should do ability. This is about asking an important question, the answer to which is likely to make an impact more broadly. These are the questions that will excite editors, reviewers, and readers. But what is an important question, and how do we recognise that it should be addressed by research? So I'm going to go on now to explore that a little bit more in step 3, which is refining the research problem using the literature. So remember that existing empirical literature is really important to construct a starting conceptual framework for the research problem, considering what are the key factors, variables and constructs that help you to understand and explore the issue under study. I don't want anyone to overthink this. It's nothing particularly complicated, but it is just your map of the territory being investigated. And believe me, if you're writing a paper on that territory, you need to understand the map, not just the detailed map of your own neighbourhood, but where it fits into that wider map as well. I cannot overemphasize how important this is, because I do see papers that clearly somebody has spent a lot of time writing and a lot of years researching, just blown out of the water by an editor or a reviewer that says, but we don't need to do this. It's already been studied. Out of the journal straight away. You do not want to be that researcher. So it's critically important to ask that question, what do we already know? As I've said, the editorial team on my journal, who assess every single submission, often will say, well, I think we know this already, or I don't know that this is new. And it isn't ethical to your research participants to study something to which we already know the answer. You shouldn't, as I've already said, even consider moving forwards on a study without exploring the literature in an area. And boy, believe me, whilst there might not be exactly the study that you're looking for in your context, your population, etc., there is likely to be literature that might be sufficient to address the problem you started with. Remember that this literature might not be found in palliative care. There could be studies in other clinical areas or in fields such as management science or sociology or whatever that might inform your study. But it might also be in palliative care. Remember, you can't know everything though. Here you can see this graph of the number of items on PubMed when I just searched for palliative from 1970 through to last year. It's just not possible to keep up to date with the rapid expansion of palliative care literature. So you need to know how to search and find literature of relevance quickly and effectively. And that's nearly always going to be one of your first starting points before you're really thinking about finessing that question that you're asking. Remember as well that formal literature reviews, and here are some examples that I've been involved with in the past, might even form part of the background work that you do to understand and contextualize a question. So, for example, I'm involved in a research field looking at research alongside volunteers. And here are 3 of the reviews that I've done in that field. So remember, reviews, whether your own review or the review of somebody else, are a great source of information in your chosen field. And if there isn't one, again, you might consider that's actually your first step, to write a literature review question rather than a research question, so that you're adding from the review of the literature. And remember, a review isn't just summarizing normally, it's adding something specific and particular to the literature. And you might want to do that actually rather than adding empirical data. So it is really important. You can also find and identify papers that do the work for you. They examine what research is needed that can provide evidence of the need or demand for particular research questions to be answered. And here are a couple of examples that I'm just aware of. There are plenty of others as well. And certainly in some countries, there have been efforts to also formally set those priorities. This is an example from the UK of work to set priority questions that was done in about 2015. And it included the perspectives of patients and family carers. And in the UK context, they came up with a top 10. So some of the top things that were identified were about things like out-of-hours provision, access to palliative care, advanced care planning. And as an editor, it's easier to see the need for research if it is supported by this sort of underpinning rationale. But remember, this was, in this example, UK focused. It might not be appropriate for your context. So this is something that you might have to seek out in your own cultures and contexts. Remember too that even if you find your research question has been answered and so there's no need for you to conduct the study you had considered, you might need to still consider implementation research, an understanding of how to implement findings in a different context or setting. So you might still be doing research, but it might be a different form of research to that's what you had perhaps expected when you started on this research journey. As well as clearly articulating to the reader what is already known and in what context, it's important to be precise about what is not yet known. So as an editor, I'm not just looking for somebody to say, we don't know, in a broad and non-specific manner. I'm looking for somebody to articulate a more precise gap, together with an appraisal, as already said, of why it's important the gap should be filled using empirical data. And remember and articulate the importance of context. I've mentioned this several times already in my talk. You know that much palliative care research has been carried out in high-income Western countries. It might be that the research is transferable and can be implemented readily in other cultures and contexts. However, it may also be that the context is so different that it is reasonable to assume that a similar project might identify quite different findings. So we've seen this, for example, in some of the advanced care planning literature, where it's apparent that important factors such as sharing prognosis and the role of family can be important and very different across contexts. As an editor, I'm always looking for somebody to think internationally in their approach. I'm much less likely to publish a paper that is not aware of this wider context and situates their argument only in that national context and with reference to national studies in a particular country. That's not to say that the research isn't national. Most of it is just carried out in one country, but the awareness needs to be international. And when you're looking at that existing literature, it's also really important to consider how something has been studied in the past. There are important lessons there. So have a look also at what methods have been used. Why were those methods used? Were there any methodological deficiencies or gaps? Were there any recommendations about the methods that might be used? And if so, what were they? Because remember, I can be persuaded by a logical argument. So for the editor, reviewers, readers, you are making the argument for why this research is needed, persuading us that you understand the context for this study, demonstrating what is known and what is not known, and that it is worth studying this. You need to relate your question clearly to that gap and context, linked to the methods you choose so that they are congruent. All of that is really important, and you need to think all of that through before moving on to step 4, defining the research aim, articulating it clearly as an aim with a to and an action, such as to measure, to explore, to understand, and then going on to use that to define the question, because a research aim is not quite the same as a research question. So the research question to me is critically important, but surprisingly often overlooked in published papers. Remember, it has to be a research question, not a philosophical question or a legal question. It should be answerable through the analysis and interpretation of data. So there are lots of different tools that can help you to construct a research question, but you have to use the right tool for the job. PICO, for example, can be helpful, but only really for studies where there is a comparison, such as a trial or other similar evaluative research. Don't make it fit if it's not right for the question at hand. So another example is CIMO. You can see here how I've related it to the same topic or research question as a PICO question, research problem as a PICO question, but it leads to the interrogation of a different facet of the problem in a completely different way. So this just emphasises the importance of a clear question that guides the research, not just identifying a topic area. And there are other guides, there's Spider and Spice and all sorts of things. Have a look at them, think about what might be relevant to help you be specific in articulating your question and the boundaries of that question. My colleagues later in this session, I know, will be talking much more about the importance of design, but I just wanted to highlight this new updated framework from the UK Medical Research Council, or MRC, regarding evaluating complex interventions, because I think it speaks quite nicely to what we're talking about in terms of questions. So in this framework they make it quite clear that for a complex intervention, many palliative care interventions are complex interventions, there are multiple questions that could be asked, depending on the maturity and development of the field, from identifying or developing interventions, to exploring and testing feasibility questions, to implementation, to evaluation of effect. It's just a very clear example of one size does not fit all. And editors are well aware of this. So we're looking for an understanding for your question of where it fits in the overall picture of perhaps a programme of research in a topic area, your research and the research of others. So to conclude, I'm not here, sadly, to tell you where your gaps are, to tell you what the gaps are. There are quite literally hundreds and thousands of research questions that could legitimately be asked. You need to become the expert in your field of what needs to be asked and why. And you can use the format that we've been talking through to create many different viable research questions in a topic area. So here you can see how the same ingredients can be combined in different ways to produce outcomes that are very different to each other. I'm not here to tell you if you should be producing biscuits, cakes, truffles, or even perhaps something quite unexpected. But as an editor, I do need it to be transparent why you have done what you've done and the justification that underpins this. So if you can, as an editor, if I can follow the logic of what you have done and it is clearly, specifically and precisely articulated, then I'm going to be much more likely to follow through with the paper, through to the methods, through to the narrative, through to the story that is being presented, to think that this could be something that is of interest to our readership. It will enhance your chance of success. And just to conclude, I have highlighted that I've written a little bit about some of these issues in the past for the Indian Journal of Palliative Care. And you'll find some of that in that freely available editorial. But I've explored the question-making issues in a little bit more detail here. So I've addressed some of those core questions that I highlighted in that editorial related to developing and writing research questions to address gaps in knowledge. And I'm looking forward to the other talks exploring different aspects of publication to maximise your chance of success. So good luck. But remember, it's not really luck, but good, thoughtful planning that is the key to success. So perhaps instead of good luck, good planning and thinking instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine Walsh, for that very crisp, precise talk, as well as the recommended resources for further reading. I now request Dr. Raghavendra Ramanjulu to start his session on appropriate design and methodology. Over to you.
Good evening, everybody. After that very specific discussion and talk by Dr. Catherine, I would take up the next aspect of research to become a viable analysis, then go in for publication. So what is most important after the first initial step of framing research question is the appropriate design and methodology. That becomes the most important next aspect. Now, as palliative care physicians, for us, it's a real dilemma. Are we going in for care, or we actually have to have evidence based in this group of people, especially wherein people are really sick or people are at the end of life? But what we have to deliver is quality of life in these people. And if this quality of life is there, the brain always saying that you have to do the right thing. The right thing is what is important, is what all of us have come into this field of palliative medicine. Doing that right thing right is what matters most. And it never happens without the right evidence. To that evidence to add on, and how we actually take this ahead, the evidence-based work in our own country and publish that and make it better is what this talk is all about, following that second step. Now, Dr. Catherine, I never thought she's going to end her talk with cakes and truffles. And my analogy is also cakes and truffles. I think the last 1 month I've gone through a lot. So I wanted to actually make it a little bit more lighter. So in terms of that, the first aspect is to make a well-risen cake is what is important over here. Now, what are the different type of recipes to make it rise? Is there a gap in what we know, a personal way of doing it? Or we have done the baking before, we have not been able to actually bring about a well-risen cake? That's a personal thing. Then after that, research question, adding certain aspects, certain other ingredients, or keeping it for some time. Does this actually make it better? That's a research question. How do we actually have a problem solved? Or somebody else have done that. So that's what is the review of literature, what we were talking about. So pick up the recipe in terms of using that research specific question and how we go about it. And the ingredients to make the specific chosen recipe is what it's all about. And once you've made those perfect cupcakes, then you're going to analyze it and put it across as your own recipe. So first is identify the problem, refine the problem, frame the question, see if others have done that. And now this is what we are talking about. Find the way you would like to do it after you've gone through all the first upper steps. The research method, the design and method becomes the biggest chunk in between the layers. That is from where you've actually initiated to find the gap and how you go about that process of doing it. So that is in the pretext, that is in the context of what you're going to do. And then the last part is the analogy of getting it through into your publications. So that's the research methodology. I will come in a short while what it is. Now, write and publish it. That is where we all want to be. And Dr. Catherine has gone in steps. I would also try to actually summarize each slide and go about in each step. So what is the research design? What is the logic behind it? It's the logic. What is the theory behind the study? It is to address the research question, which we have actually gone through a lot. We have defined it, we have gone through, we've researched it, reviewed it, and there is a gap which is found, and we want to have a logical answer to it. And how am I going to do that research to get the answer? That's the blueprint, what design is all about. And how we conduct the entire process of this research becomes the basic design of the study. Now, this blueprint could consist of data collection, measurement, and analysis at the later aspect. It could actually be a part of this. Whereas the methodology, which is the other component of my talk, is to be based on the research design itself. So once you have research framed the question, then you're getting into the design and the methodology, which is the most important part of the study, which is defined well, then you can go ahead. It is essentially a planned, scientific, and non-biased. It should be various procedures, schemes, steps, algorithms have to be mentioned over here so that another researcher who actually goes through this would be able to get his answers if he has to conduct. Is it valid? Whether he could actually be looking into it. And specifically, when you come to an editor or a peer review, this is exactly what you're going to do. Whether the study has been conducted well or not, the methodology being laid very well. They include many things like observation, theoretical procedures, experimental studies, numerical statistics. All these things could be a part of methodology. Now, to actually differentiate, or somebody might get confused between a research design and a methodology. The overall structure of the research is what the research design is all about, as well as it is based on a research question, whereas the research methodology is the procedure to collect and analyze that data. And it is mainly based on the research design. So every step of data collection or the process is actually interlinked with one another. The focus in design being what kind of study and what kind of result we need to expect is what we are, whereas the methodology is more suitable to collect and analyze that evidence, that how you go about doing the answering that question, what you're talking about, or what is the gap we have already found. There is a little bit of confusion which I've seen in some of the manuscripts which I've seen is methods and methodology. Somebody might get confused between method and methodology. What is methodology? Methodology is a hierarchy, better, stronger, wherein it is the rationale for the research approach, whereas method is just describing the technique or the tools used to collect the data. or it could be in terms of methodology being justification of why this approach of research problem has been accepted or which has been taken up. It's the logic and the assumption behind it. So method being just to detail well so that it could be replicated for the study if somebody else wants to conduct a study in the same group of population. Now, different types of medical research. Now, if you look at primarily, this is of three types: basic, clinical, as well as epidemiology, whereas secondary. Now, once you do a gap analysis and you've found saying that there's a lot of evidence, lot of literature already present, then you might be just doing a second research over there, creating meta-analysis or systematic reviews or just a narrative review. Whereas if the gap is there and there have been nobody who's done, you could be an observational study or an experimental among the epidemiological research is what you could pick up. That's where you go about doing it. Clinical research could be drug and other aspects, whereas us as clinicians, I think primary research and secondary research is where we would be focusing more on epidemiological or the other aspects which I did just mention. So to recollect, there are other ways of actually the forms of research which you do. The methodology could be actually from viewpoint, application, objectives, or just the sort of information wherein if you want to be completely exploratory and in-depth analysis, then you're going to go for a qualitative one. Or if it's something which you need to have numbers, statistics, and very specific in terms of getting an idea of applicability, you can go in for a quantitative research over there. Now, once you have a clear research question, as Dr. Catherine mentioned, which has to facilitate the choosing the optimal study design. As I mentioned, once you've done a good review and understood what it is, the gaps are there, you know what it is going to be, then the study design is going to come in to understand. Now, whether if you already multiple studies are there, I've already mentioned, whether you want to create level A evidence, level B evidence, or level C evidence is something which you'll have to look at the population and how you're going to look into the amount of literature evidence already there and then build up your design study hierarchy, which among these you can pick it up. Now, what does a good study design have? Repeatability. That's something which another researcher should understand by reading your research itself or your presentation and then go about doing the research into their own way or implement into their own program wherever it's feasible or possible, or generalizability. That is, it could be applied to a population as been sampled. When you have to repeat that again in a different setting, could be something which is there. I've given some examples over here. Like you could use, we would have started with a vanilla cake, but if you want to make a chocolate cake next, whether the same thing applicability could be there. So generalizability is something which we will look into. Now, three questions which in a study is designed to be thought of is, what was the aim of the study? If it is just a population and outcome question, which is going to be more descriptive there, or is a PICO question, wherein population intervention, comparison, and outcome questions, analytics. So qualitative and quantitative is what probably we'll be looking into, or mixed analysis over here. If analytic, and it's in the second part, but it has to be randomized. That is what is important to actually get the bias out. So if it's yes, then randomized control trials are the best of the hierarchy in actually setting the trend or the best evidence possible. No, it's going to be just observational. Now, if in the observational, when there is an outcome which has to be determined. So if it's exposure, which is actually in a small group, like in a small group of individuals, like in a factory, or say an exposure and there is an oncological problem happening over there, small group cohort is what we would actually go into the type. At the time of exposure, if it has been in a spread area, so cross-sectional designs are something which we look into, or if the exposure is very, very rare and it's something, then a small specific case could be involved. So case control studies are going to be the design for your research. Now, it could be descriptive, deals with why, qualitative, deals with what, and it's going to be quantitative. It could be correlational designs, wherein there are association between exposure and outcome, wherein you're going to define a null hypothesis. That is, there is no correlation between an exposure and outcome, or an alternative hypothesis where there is definitely an exposure to an exposure to what is happening, or an exposure and the outcome is definitely there. So therefore, it is going to be correlational. Now, experimental designs are there where null hypothesis or alternative hypothesis could be there. Now, in terms of the gold standard could be randomization, which has to be done in actually understanding these aspects over there. I think I've written a lot of aspects and examples over there to make it very simplified. Um, so coming to the next part, after my design, or what I actually want to look into, is methodology. The methodology is actually follows the part after you've actually decided the design based on whatever I've discussed up till now. The important aspect being assures that the hypothesis will be proved or it should be disproved using the right tool. Now, right tool is something which is important for you to actually go about collecting the data. Now, once you've actually done thorough research, you'll understand within your study whether those right tools are present or should we develop your own tools. Now, developing an own tool becomes very, very difficult at times, or it takes a lot of time to actually bring about that tool for your study. So appropriateness and how you go about doing it is very, very important. Now, it should also contain a detailed strategy, how the objectives which you have defined after your research question has been there have been achieved. Now, how do you go about inquiring it is the method of qualitative on quantitative. A qualitative where the person who is the investigator does not know what he's going to expect, and it's going to be the why of what it's all about. So it uncovers the entire knowledge of thoughts or opinions of a small group of individuals, it could be, and in-depth understanding of what they have gone through or what is their experiences being. It could be a focus group, interviews, or observational, or it could be simple field notes also in terms of adding to their aspects of what that important aspects of field exposure has happened to the subjects, or even the person who's actually taking up the research. It could also bear a lot of concerns and problems to them also. Quantitative quantifies a problem with is more of numerical data. Now, it could be more in terms of defining incidence, prevalence, or a magnitude of relationship to an exposure or an intervention to the outcome. That's what becomes very, very important in quantitative. Now, methodology to go about in the subsets, what you're going to talk about specifically when these things have to be highlighted and described during your study write-up, or you should actually know that before itself, where exactly the study is going to be. Either it's going to be at your own place, your setting, a single site, or is it going to be multi-centric, or what is it going to be? The study location is very, very important. What is the duration from when you're going to start and when you're going to end the period? That's the next aspect. The selection of the study group. What are the specific inclusion exclusion criteria? I'll just come in the next slide. It's very, very important to have the appropriate inclusion exclusion criteria. Prerequisites for this study. As I told, study tools are important. So what are the terminologies which you're going to use through and through? And who are the other researchers who are actually going to be there with you, the fellow colleagues, your orientation towards this terminologies, tools, how the applicability of these tools have to be explained, and it's important over there. Now, as I mentioned, inclusion and exclusion criteria become very, very important part of the methodology which you're going to be. The tighter the inclusion exclusion criteria are going to be, the lesser the bias, the better form of information or data you're going to get. So you'll have to set the inclusion exclusion criteria well. Unlike observational, interventional studies will require randomization process. So how you're going to randomize them, how you're going to allocate the interventional group, and how the control group is going to be picked up and how they're going to be compared is something which you will have to have a detailed understanding and put across also. Now, what could be the discontinuation criteria? This is where it's very, very important to define how you're going to stop and where you're going to end this. Unless and until these aspects are not clear in the set trend which I've mentioned over here, the peer review process or the editor would look for these specific things, and whether these are certain aspects which they also have a comparative group in their own clinical settings or trials. Usually this is what happens, and if these are not defined from design to methodology, they do not accept the paper or they would say, no, this, I don't think so, is probably in my clinical practice workable. Now, methodology should also have the data collection, proformas, what the subjects are going to be. So based upon that, the proforma is going to be there. If there are specific examination and other things which have to be there, or measurements which have to be there in terms of the tools which are there, now do you have appropriate ways of actually documenting this data? And if there are specific investigations which are there, what investigations have been there specifically during your the intervention or exposure, and how it went through the outcome, and if there are any investigations which have done, should be there. Now, planning this becomes important of the collection, compilation, and data entry and data cleaning, wherein you need to actually remove all of it. Now, the last part is how confidential you were. How did you actually relate to the entire study? How did you actually look into the best interest of the patient? If it was something which is observational and somebody's talking about, somebody's emotional and other aspects are there, how did you actually support them? How did you look about the sensitivity of a person who's undergoing this study? Because as I've opened my slide saying that in palliative medicine, it's all about care, and we look at a lot of quality and confidentiality, being very, very approachable. And in terms of if some outcomes are there after you've done the study, or some issues and concerns are there, how well have you handled is very important. Now, ethical clearance is something which takes a lot more important over here. And unless and until you don't have an ethical clearance, most of the aspects of research actually is not accepted in today's world. So therefore, I think you should have your institutional review board, or going up to any of the other review boards. If you don't have your own institutional review board, at least make sure that you have an ethical committee from any of the other group of institutions which you're linked to, or who could actually give you the clearance. Now, once these aspects have all been taken into consideration, the next aspect is the result and analysis. I'm sure Dr. He would actually do the best. My next co-speaker would be actually talking about results and analysis, and definitely Rakesh would do well and more justice to basics of result and analysis. Now, take home points. First of all, identify the clinical problem. As Dr. Catherine did mention, it has to be very simple and specific. And the basis over here is a very good literature review. It's very, very important. Unless and until this is not done, your question formulation won't be proper. If this is not there, the design actually will not be able to be selected. Now, going back again, your literature review will tell you what evidence is already there, or what is the other people who have already done the studies, what are the pitfalls they've had, or what are the difficulties they had. So no need to do those or commit those mistakes again. The pitfalls could be actually taken into consideration then and there, and we could actually appropriately design the study. And what type of study you need to actually do about or go about is something which you can plan very well. Now, coming to methods and methodology. Now, I've defined very well, methodology is the complete aspect depending on the design, whereas methods is something which you do go about doing the nitty-gritty of the methodology. So it's the smaller aspects. The basis over here is the big rock foundation, which is important. Now, once you have done the design and methodology very, very strong, the other smaller aspects will be able to be done very well. And that's how you go about doing the study, as well as going about analysis and then publishing really well. So I would hand over the entire the stage to Rakesh to take over for the analysis, as well as statistics and whatever the basic statistics analysis are going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavendra. Over to Dr. Rakesh.
Now we'll be talking about the basic statistics and the analysis for a high quality research. I bring greetings from my institute. In next around 20 minutes or so, we'll be talking about the basic aspects of variables, the data and its summarization, and various statistical tools that are available for any inference. Now, when we talk of the variables, it is defined as anything that has quantity or quality associated to it. Now, the variables definition is important for any good quality research because we may have some conceptual definition, but for the purpose of a good indicator into a research, they should also have an operational definition with some scale of measurement. For example, if you want to look for the A's, then we have to define A's at the last birthday, and we should also define whether we'll be measuring it months or years. And this should be defined appropriately into the research. The variables can be of two types, qualitative and quantitative. They're also named as categorical versus numerical. We need to understand these variables because this is important for the purpose of the statistical analysis when we try to describe them or summarize them into our result section. The qualitative variables could be nominal, like for example, gender, cure, blood groups, or they could be ordinal. Ordinal means they carry some ordered categories. For example, if we talk about the severity of carcinoma, they could be stage 1, 2, 3, or 4. Or it could be a socioeconomic status like lower socioeconomic status, middle or upper. On the other hand, quantitative variables can be discrete or continuous. Discrete like number of asthmatic attacks. Continuous means like, for example, say height, weight, age, length of hospital stay, etc., where they can have a continuity of various variables, quantitative variables into it. But sometimes into a study, we can interchange them. Usually, we can convert quantitative variables into the qualitative. For example, say we do define or measure the age of a person in a quantitative manner, but sometimes we can categorize them as child, adult, or elderly, and it then becomes a qualitative variable. So it depends upon the need of your research. You can use them, but remember that based on your variables, appropriate statistical tool will be used. The basic purpose of statistics is when we collect the data, it will be a huge data, a good number of variables from a large number of populations. So what we need to do is to reduce the data to understand them in a meaningful value. And this is what the statistics is. So basically it summarizes the data, and then probably if you want to compare some data for some inference, then it compares also. And for this we use appropriate statistical tool depending upon what you are comparing, and will be coming a little later. The statistics are primarily, you can broadly divide them as descriptive statistics or the inferential statistics. Descriptive means we are using sample statistics like mean, median, along with their standard deviation or interquartile range to describe the sample and the population from which is actually derived. So probably it will be giving an overall idea that the average age of the population in the study is this much. So this gives you basically the understanding of the whole data that you have, though it is not decision oriented. But then usually the pilot studies are more descriptive in nature, where you say that the average is, the mean age or the median age was this much, or the stage of cancers was this much. So these are all descriptive statistics, which many times we use for various observational studies or cross-sectional studies. On the other hand, inferential statistics is primarily where you try to compare the data observed from different population, whether you have randomized them or you want to compare something for some meaningful outcome, whether there is something better in one as compared to other. So you want to make some inference out of it, and wherein we use the inferential statistics. The analysis could be done at using various variables. If it is one variable, it is univariate. If you use two variables, it is bivariate. More than two variables, it becomes multivariate. For univariate analysis, this means you're using only one variable. Depending upon the data variable type, categorical versus quantitative, we need to describe them as frequency or percentage, or in case it is a quantitative, you describe them mean with standard deviation, median with range. Also try to report interquartile range when you are reporting the data into median. The other aspect which is important to understand for statistical purpose is the measures of central tendency and the measures of dispersion. The measures of central tendency means it is a single value that attempts to describe a set of data which you have collected from variable patients. And it is used in the form of mean and median, but sometimes we use mode or quartile also. On the other, dispersion means the degree, because the single mid value, which you describe as mean and median, is not the value. You should also be aware of that how much across this mean or the central value your data is dispersed, and this refers to the dispersion refers to the degree to which your data are scattered around a specific value, and this is measured in various forms. Usually the standard deviation is the most commonly tool, where we use two standard deviations to represent data, because two standard deviation will include almost 95% of your population, which has been from which the data has been collected. So usually we report it as two standard deviation for the 95%. Sometimes we use standard of mean also, wherein it describes the variability that is expected when measuring the mean from several different samples. That's a basic difference between standard deviation of mean and standard error of mean. You also need to look for the percentile range and interquartile range. Whenever you are reporting your data in median, you should report range and interquartile range. Interquartile range describes the boundaries that are equal to the observation between 25th and 75th percentiles of your data. So this gives a fair idea that majority of population is in this IQR, and you can understand your data much better when you're reporting the IQR along with median. Also, you have to describe about the distribution of data. Now, this is important when you try to apply the statistical tool. When you just try to describe or collect data and try to display on a graphical representation, you can see sometimes they can have a symmetrical distribution, a bell-shaped curve. If you draw an outline of it, it becomes symmetrical, right, across a mean or median. So this is called symmetrical. Usually the term also used is the Gaussian distribution or the normally distributed data. But sometimes the data may not be symmetrically distributed. It could be either left skewed or it could be the right skewed data. So based on this, sometimes we need to assume something statistically, correct them to make them more symmetrical statistical tools, or we have to use certain other tests. So these are the various tests that can assess the distribution of data. It can also be done by the eye rolling. You can also see by various other tools, like for example, difference between mean and median. If it is more than 5%, so probably the data is skewed. If it is less than 5%, the data is probably having a Gaussian distribution. Now, the concerns, why do we want to look for the data distribution, whether it's Gaussian versus non-Gaussian? Because the Gaussian distribution, the application of tests, the statistical test would be different. They have better validity as compared to the non-Gaussian data, and the results or the interpretation that you do are more valid with the normally distributed data as compared to a skewed data. But once a study has been done and the data is non-Gaussian, you cannot go back and redo the study. So what next? So sometimes we can use statistical tools to transform them to normality and then apply the tests which are applicable for Gaussian distribution data, which are called as parametric tests. But still, if they are not normally distributed, then you can use the non-parametric tests and mention it to your study. So when it's a Gaussian distribution, you should report your data as a descriptive statistics in the form of mean and standard deviation. In case it is non-Gaussian distribution, you should report median. And along with median, you should also report range and interquartile range. So this is what we have summarized, the descriptive and inferential statistics. Let's proceed how to compare the data when you have. So this is called bivariate analysis. And based on the type of variables that you have, you can use variables too. So that's why it becomes understanding that what variables are you trying to compare. So when you compare the data, there are 4 points that you should remember: that what type of variables are you using, how your data Gaussian versus non-Gaussian, how many groups were there in the study, and whether they were related or non-related. So let's see the first one, the combination of two variables. It could be because they are either categorical or quantitative. So there could be 3 options. The normal, not normal, just mention whether it is Gaussian or non-Gaussian. You can see various by eye rolling or by using the statistical tool. Because the study design is well known to you, you know that how many groups are there. And related versus unrelated, you can look for that the group distribution, how you have done it, whether they are before after study design, you have done matching or clustering. So based on this, whether the pre and post are related or there are 2 separate groups, they are unrelated, they are independent groups, you can just assess from your study design. So based on those 4, you can choose an appropriate statistical test. I may not go into detail because for the application of this, it is suggested that take the help from some statistician who will help you But since you have to write them and report them in your manuscript also, so understanding becomes much, much important. If you are comparing two categorical data variables for the infectious statistics, so if there are two groups and they are unrelated, you need to apply the chi-square test. In case they are related, that is pre and post data, in those situations, you need to apply the McNeman test. If there are more than two groups, if they are unrelated, again, in this situation, when you're comparing categorical versus categorical, for unrelated, again, it will be chi-square, and for related, it will be McNeman test. But remember, in case if your sample size or the event rate is less than 30, in those situations, or the absolute number of the event or the occurrence is less than 5, when overall incidence is less than 20%, you need to apply Fisher exact test instead of chi-square test. Now, the second situation is when you're comparing a categorical data versus quantitative data. Like, for example, you want to compare the in two groups and you want to compare the age of the patient or the BMI of the patient. So this means one is category because you have two groups, and the age, which is a quantitative variable. So depending upon the type of data we mentioned earlier, it is Gaussian, you will apply parametric test. If it is non-Gaussian, you will apply non-parametric test. So if there are two groups and they are normally distributed, for unrelated, you apply student t-test. For related data, you apply pair t-test. If there are more than two groups, they are normally distributed. In unrelated, you apply one-way ANOVA. For related, you apply repeated measures ANOVA. In case if your data is non-parametric, that is you are using for non-Gaussian distribution, and you have two groups, for unrelated, you need to apply Wilcoxon-Rank-Sam, which is also known as Mann-Whitney, and for related, you apply Wilcoxon-Signed-Rank. In case if there are more than two groups into your study, and they are unrelated, apply Kruskal-Wallis, and they are related, apply Friedman's test. So why I have mentioned about these tests, because when you're reporting your study, you're writing a protocol or a study, you need to mention that your data was normally distributed or having a non-Gaussian distribution, and you have compared this variable using this test. This needs to be reported when you send it for your dissertation submission or for publication. So that's why understanding is important. Now, when we apply this test, there are certain, these are primarily testing the hypothesis that we have presumed into our protocol writing, but there are certain pitfalls to understand. We need to understand that the statistical significance does not guarantee the clinical significance, so that is one very important thing. Because sometimes when you are comparing the statistical, it may come as a p-value, but for example, say if you say the longevity of life is 13 days versus 13.5 days. But the point here is whether it is of clinical significance for some particular disease. So they may not have a clinical significance. So whenever you interpret data, statistical significance is not always equivalent to a clinical significance. Also pay attention to the effect size and the confidence interval. It is very, very important because when you try to compare the p-values, sometimes the p-values may be significant. You may get a p-value of 0.001. But when you compare the confidence interval in these patient groups, you will find that the confidence intervals, that is 95% confidence interval, will overlap between the two groups. So this means you may not be very confident that in spite of getting a statistical significance in the form of p-value, the data does not give a clear-cut indication that one group, one drug, or one technique is better than the other in spite the p-value was significant. So that's why understanding the effect size and the confidence interval is very, very important, because clinically unimportant effects may be statistically significant if a study is very large and therefore has a small standard error and extreme precision. Also, it is important to understand that we need to plan a priori that what type of analysis, what type of subgroup analysis needs to be understood. Because if you try to apply multiple tests and multiple subgroup analysis, then probably some value will become significant because the sample size will vary, and we have not a priori tested the sample size based on the subgroup analysis. So the interpreting this subgroup analysis for significance becomes an important issue, and hence you should be very, very cautious to avoid this type of subgroup analysis for reporting or interpreting some clinical significance out of it. Because the difference resulted from the combined effect of a small imbalance in the subgroup because each time you do a multiple testing of a subgroup analysis, the chances of the false positive rate increases multiple times. If you run more than one test, your false positive rate will be higher than 5%. And when we assume the sample size or the application of statistical tool, we usually accept the significance level of 0.05. We say that this amount of error is acceptable to us. But if you try to apply multiple testing, it becomes more than 5%, which is not acceptable to us for clinical interpretation. And hence, we should be cautious when we are doing multiple testing. So to summarize, we need to understand the statistics at the study planning itself. You need to understand your various variables, which type of study designs are you choosing for your particular study. And when you are reporting it, you should always mention the data distribution, how it is. It is Gaussian versus non-Gaussian, and accordingly, you should choose and report your statistical tool that you have used it. Also remember that involves statistician from the planning stage of the study itself, so that you are reporting the correct statistical tool in a correct format, so that the interpretation becomes important, it's applicable. But also remember that interpret your study just not on the basis of a statistical analysis outcome, that is the p-value. Do try to analyze, look for your data, and look for the clinical significance out of it for the correct interpretation of the results that you have observed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh Garg, for that wonderful presentation. Very simple and clear and crisp. Now, let us listen to Dr. Jennifer Jeba on her presentation on writing well, sharing the research story. Over.
Greetings from Christian Medical College, Vellore. I would like to thank the conference organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk on this important component of research and publication, writing well, sharing the research story. Not all of us are born story writers, but scientific manuscript writing is very similar to writing a story. The abstract is the summary of the story. The title is equivalent to the story name. The introduction, methods, and results form the beginning, middle, and end of your research story. And the discussion, which throws perspective to the different findings of your work, forms the moral of the story. For want of time, we will talk about writing a good manuscript in terms of an original article. So this research story, which goes through different eyes, the editor is looking to see if this particular work adds significantly to scientific literature. The reviewers are assessing the scientific robustness, the manuscript content and quality. The readers can be quite international, from general clinicians to policymakers. They are looking for topics that interest them and are seeing if they can understand it with minimal effort. As a writer, you are trying to succinctly convey the credibility of your work and important contributions. So writing, like talking, is a communication skill. Scientific writing can be a joy or a trial or both at the same time. It is time-consuming and daunting, but rewarding. There are several barriers. Could be writing anxiety, not knowing how to start and how to finish, lack of training, experience, confidence, unfamiliarity with scientific writing requirements, which many of us allude to. Fear of failure, a genuine lack of time, and perfectionism. The good news is writing as a skill can be developed and learned. As David Cook puts it, A manuscript in preparation will remain in preparation indefinitely unless acted upon by a motivated author. It will not get published as long as it sits on your desk. You need to get the manuscript off of your to-do list and onto someone else's, the editors or reviewers. So for this to happen, you need to dedicate time to write regularly, maybe as short as 15 minutes a day. For it is said that those who write regularly are substantially more productive than those who postpone writing, waiting for a large chunk of time. So get started, set realistic deadlines, be ready to work on multiple refined drafts till you have your final version. So you might ask, where do I start? Start with hardcore data, the results, followed by introduction and discussion. The abstract and conclusion are generally the last two sections to be written. Try making an outline. Put down your thoughts as bullet points under each section. Slowly evolve them into sentences and paragraphs. Ensure that each paragraph advances the research story. Pay maximum attention to the title, abstract, tables, and figures. How do I decide which journal to submit? So most or all journals, their homepage would have the scope of the journal, the audience they cater to, preferences for topics or study types. Scroll through back issues to look for the type and topic of articles that are being published. Ask guidance from experienced colleagues and mentors. You could write to the editor and ask if your work is of interest to their journal. Decide whether you want to go to a specialty journal or a general journal. You also need to keep in mind the impact factor of the journal and balance it with the quality and potential impact of your work. Think of the institution and promotion requirements for yourself. Once you have decided the journal, take time to read through the author instructions and follow them seriously and precisely. Please take time to read the recommendations for the conduct, reporting, editing, and publications of scholarly work in medical journals, which has been recently updated. So coming to the title, this is the shortest abstract and probably the first part a potential reader reads and could be the last if it doesn't catch their attention. So think early, take time and effort, regularly return to hone it. Use keywords that reflect the essence and purpose of the paper. This could be a constant reminder to the writer itself to focus on the main message. Avoid jargons or non-standard abbreviations. State the issue that has been addressed in your work rather than the conclusions. It is found that short titles carry higher citation and titles with specific country names in it have worse citation. The introduction itself is setting the stage. You could look at it as three different sections. The first section, talk about the broad problem, its context, what is already known. Then you move on to give more specific focus to the unknown, to that gap which you are trying to fill and why filling that gap is important. Finally, state the intent, rationale, hypothesis, objectives, and the questions your work is trying to address. Keep it short and focused. Do not exceed 2 double-spaced pages. You could do a broad literature review, but keep the literature review relevant to the scope of the paper. Going on to methods, this is where you describe the study, its design very clearly, and it's important that the design is scientifically robust. Define your subjects, how sample size was collected, who was included and who was excluded and why. If there were any interventions, you define the interventions, list out the outcomes, how they were measured, what were the different parameters used, any tools used. Describe the statistical methodology used in data analysis. Follow the guidelines that have been prescribed for reporting different kinds of studies. and definitely mention about the ethical approval that has been obtained for your work. Under results is where you present the facts that have been collected through your data collection in an organized way. Use past tense, focus each paragraph on one particular question or outcome. Try not to repeat sentences or keep them monotonous. Instead, be generous with use of adjectives. Usually, there are no references in results unless you want to reference a particular method or a tool that has been used. Appropriate use of tables, graphs, and figures will display your results in a good way. Coming to tables and figures, they hugely complement the results. And these could be used to project primary and secondary outcomes. It gives further highlight and additional clarity to the findings. However, try and avoid repetition within the text, tables, and figures. A little repetition may be acceptable when it comes to key findings or those findings that you want to emphasize on. Remember, tables and figures are often viewed and even used by readers, so keep them comprehensive and self-explanatory with a good title, footnotes, expansion for abbreviations, and any comments if needed. The discussion can be an often neglected part of the entire manuscript. Again, think of it as 4 different sections. In the first para, you give a concise summary of the important findings. Slowly move on to say how your findings integrate with work done previously through similar studies. Look out for any confounding factors in your work, what impact that has in the application of your study. Focus on the strengths and limitations. Point out what is new and novel in your work, and also how the study scope and design would affect interpretation and application of its findings. The last section of discussion is very important. Try and focus on the implications for clinical practice and research, how your work has advanced the field. How does this change clinical practice? And are there areas that further need to be explored before making very emphatic recommendations? Some errors to avoid in discussion would be not to repeat detailed data from results or include information unrelated to the stated purpose of the article, repeating in verbatim findings from other studies without interpreting or critically analyzing them, presenting new data, details about techniques and enrollment criteria in the discussion, or overstating interpretation of results. Conclusion deserves a separate paragraph. It should have a concise and clear take-home message, mention specific areas for possible improvement with future studies, avoid excessive generalization and or implications of the study, and repetition of concepts. The abstract forms the summary of the story. It is the most important part, and if the reader has passed the title and come on to the abstract, this is what is going to make them decide if they're going to dig further into the article. This is generally the last section to be written and should be a concise summary conveying the message very effectively. Follow the journal requirements, structure, and word count. There are generally no references, abbreviations, or acronyms in the abstract. For facts already known, use the present tense, and for findings from the present work, use past tense. So an abstract is like a mini manuscript. So keep it very concise. In the background, give a brief statement of current knowledge, the gap, and why it matters. Under methods, describe the novel method or the approach that has been used. Results, limited to key findings that everybody needs to know. And in conclusion, highlight the major implications with the interpretation of results and its broader significance. Moving on to references, follow the style and requirements of the journal. Avoid abstracts and personal communication with other authors. If you feel that personal communication is too essential to be cited, cite the name of the person and date of communication in parentheses within the text. Use electronic reference management softwares to make referencing easy. It is so important that as you move on to research, to clarify upfront order of authorship, expectations, and responsibilities of each co-author. And authorships are based on substantial input into conception, design, data analysis, interpretation, and critical revision of the manuscript. Avoid ghost and gift authorships, and those who provide lesser contributions should and do not qualify for authorship should be listed in the acknowledgement. Keywords is often given as an afterthought. However, it is important as they enable the database searching of the article, and these should be provided in compliance with journal specifications. Most journals specifically recommend a list of terms from the US National Library of Medicine's collection of medical subject headings. So include terms that point to the main topic, any innovations, any methodology, but try and avoid keywords in your title and in the keyword list. Let them not overlap. Once the manuscript has been written, it is so important to dedicate time for refining and polishing it. Look through the language. Is it simple, clear? Have technical terms been defined? Are there too many abbreviations or any jargons? Read through and look for the construct and the logical flow of the manuscript. Look for grammatical, typographical errors. Pay attention to the font size at different levels, and this might be specified in the instruction to authors. Have an experienced colleague or a mentor who is not a co-author to also review, to provide useful feedback. I would suggest you keep aside the manuscript for a week or so, and you yourself can go back with fresh eyes and read it again to see if there is need for more revision. Always focus on the core message. This should come out obviously throughout the different sections to enhance understanding of the reader. Don't tell more than necessary. This is often a temptation. And if you focus on multiple aspects, you risk being less convincing. So be ready to edit your work ruthlessly. So once the manuscript is submitted, and then you get back the response from the reviewers. If it is an accept, which is not very common, you can go ahead and celebrate with your co-authors. Often it is a major revision or a minor revision, in which case, please take the reviewer and the editor's suggestions very seriously. Don't be in a hurry to answer back. Share these with your co-authors and get their help and thoughts. Provide thoughtful, recent replies point by point in a very simple manner, in a clear manner, mentioning the section, page to enhance the ease of their reviewing. If you don't agree, or if there are divergent comments from reviewers, clarify, but be humble and respectful. Reject. It is part of the publishing game, but it can be quite discouraging. Don't get discouraged, because even eminent researchers have got this response. And most journals accept fewer than 20% of the manuscripts they receive. So definitely don't give up and consider submitting to another journal. Improvise your work using these reviewer suggestions if you agree with them. Some helpful tips are: get started. You need to kickstart somewhere, even if it means writing just one paragraph. Get started. Start where you feel comfortable and easy. Definitely allocate some dedicated time every day to write. Keep the structure of the manuscript in mind as you proceed. Get help of co-authors to overcome specific barriers. Be patient, persevere, don't give up, and make the entire process enjoyable. So in conclusion, I would like to reiterate that writing, like talking, is a skill and a discipline that can be learned and developed. So start early in your career. Allocate time to prepare the manuscript. It demands time and it demands organized planning. Read through author instructions and follow them precisely. Write clearly, accurately, and succinctly. Don't be in a hurry to submit your manuscript. Allocate that useful time, very helpful time, to refine and polish your work pre-submission. Face up and respond to reviewers. Take reviewers' suggestions constructively and seriously. Never give up, even if you go through a few rejections before your first success. It is hard work and challenging, but extremely satisfying and rewarding. So I wish you all a very successful and fruitful research career. Thank you.
That very comprehensive talk on writing well. I now request Dr. Raghu Tota to give his presentation on the editor's perspective. That will be the last presentation of the session.
Good evening, everyone. So today I will be talking about editor's perspectives, and my main perspectives are choosing the right journal, plagiarism, and salami slicing. So choosing the right journal is very important because from the day zero of starting a hypothesis, conceptualizing a hypothesis to publishing it, it takes a lot of pain and hard work. So many things are involved, right? So you have to have a hypothesis, then you have to write a protocol, then you have to submit it to the institutional ethics committee, get their permission, and then you should start doing the study. You have to talk to the patients, take their consents, then you have to collect the data, then you have to enter the data, analyze the data, and then you start writing your manuscript. And if you don't know where to publish it, then entire hard work goes in vain. So that's why choosing the right journal is very, very important. So coming to choosing the right journal, so there are various steps and various factors which are involved in choosing the right journal. So the foremost important thing in choosing the right journal is there are 10 steps which are involved and which are very, very important. If you follow these 10 steps, you know which journal you are supposed to publish into it. So if you visit this website, publica.com, you will get these charts and various other literatures about how to do a right publication. So aim and scope of the journal is very, very important, because if you don't know the aim and scope of the journal, for example, you want to publish a palliative medicine article and you are publishing it in a microbiology and a pharmacology, which it doesn't have any aims and scopes with regards to our specialty, then it is of no use to publish such manuscript or such research in that journals. Journal impact factor again is an important aspect, because we need to really understand how much the impact does this journal has. But again, we have to remember this, the journal impact factor is also a negative thing, because the high impact factor journals try to reject most of the manuscripts because the rejection rate is really very, very high. Indexation of the journals is again important, because most of the journals need to be PubMed indexed articles. Otherwise, in your promotions and in your MCI inspections, when they ask, this indexation really becomes an important matter. Again, it should be peer reviewed. Publishing time is again important, because, for example, when an erector spinae plane block had come, we started doing one study on that, and by the time we wanted to publish it, already many people have already published it, and we were not able to get the publication in time. So that's why it is very, very important, the publishing time, and most of the journals do mention on their website what is their acceptance from the time of manuscript submission to the first proof or the first correction, that time usually they specify it on their website. Again, acceptance rates, reach of the journals, check the journals for any publication similar to your research articles, check for the journal's restrictions, and beware of the predatory publishers. So all these factors are very, very important to choosing the journal for publication. So it is very difficult to remember all these points. So rather, I will sum up into 4 steps, and the 4 steps to choosing the right journal are: take-home message, I will come to that; specific publication goals; journal scope; setup; reputation and impact; and then most important, the right option. That is, choose the journal best suited in the steps above, then 2 backup journals. So these are very, very important. So coming to the first step, that is a take-home message. So state your message. So though this is not important to put it in the manuscript of what you are writing of your research, but this is very important when you are working for your manuscript, when you are writing your manuscript, to write a take-home message, because that is a key message that you want your readers to remember about your research. So you just write a note of around 3 to 4 sentences, keep it in front of your desktop or just pin it on your notice board so that it is always visible to you. And when it is whether you are starting writing the paper in the initial phases or you have already written it, this take-home message should be always visible, so that you can follow and you can follow that objective, or else when you write the manuscript, especially the description, you get lost and you sway away from your main objective. So that's why it is very important. Decide your specific publication goals. So the most important question here is, which audience do you want to reach? So when you check your take-home message and write down who would really benefit from knowing your research findings, so you have to write down in the take-home messages who are your beneficiaries. For example, I have done a palliative topic, and in the palliative topics, for example, if I had done most on about the social working aspects, so my target audience will be those people. Rather than rather than the multidisciplinary team. For example, a palliative medicine is a multidisciplinary team. So here, when an oncologist is also involved, so he may not be much interested in knowing about this aspect. So he wants to know, but may not be. So your target audience has to be very good. So there are 4 types of target audiences which you should know which audience would benefit from reading your book. So a general audience, those reading a transdisciplinary journal such as a science or a nature journal, or a specialist or a multidisciplinary audience. These journals like NEJM and JAMA fall into this group of audiences, or a single discipline audience like palliative medicine or anesthesia or pain, or a highly specialized audience in a subfield of single discipline. For example, if you take anesthesia, So in anesthesia, you will have, there are many other subspecialties in anesthesia like onco-anesthesia or obstetric anesthesia. So Journal of Obstetric Anesthesia or Journal of Onco-Anesthesiology may benefit those single discipline delegate or participants. Would an international, regional, or national audience be the best? But again, this is very important, because whenever you are targeting to target the audience which best suits you. For example, if you are doing research, especially when geographical or cultural factors are involved in your research, then the international audience is not the best target for your message. For example, if I want to do a research on the incidence of catering the patients for home care services in Indian population, but that may not be ideal for the foreigners or the international audiences. They may not be interested in that. So if you're putting that research in an international journal, our national readers means they will also read it, but it is not, we are not targeting that audience. Rather, we are targeting the international audiences. So you should be very careful whenever you're selecting which audience you want to benefit. Again, there are many language barriers, so you may need to translate to other. For example, there are certain journals like Masui. They just journal in the or Scandinavian journals. They publish in the local language. So again, you need a language support to write those papers. So our next question is about the access. We will come to that, but I have involved this point here because the target audience also comes into that question. So the target audience is like, for example, the target audience are from a poor country or from a developing nations. They are poor, so they don't have much resources to pay for the subscription of the journal. So in that case, open access journals are a good option for them. But there is a catch in the open access journal. We will come that in the next question. So do you want an open or a closed access to a published paper? So open access means the readers and their institutions, they pay nothing to read the paper. The author may or may not, okay, it is not always necessary, has to pay a article processing charge. So this is very important. So that's why in the 10-point steps I was telling you that you have to be very careful. The last point I was telling you, if you see, go back to that. So predatory publishers. So most of the predatory publishers, they don't highlight the processing charges, and once you commit to them, and then they will say, oh, you have to pay the article processing charges, and you are stuck, know what to do because you have already committed. So that's why it is very important to know that. Closed access journals are here. The author does not have to pay for publishing because the publication fees is covered by the professional society membership fees or the individuals or the institutions for reading the access. So then the next subset of question is that do you need a quick publication? So because that's what I was telling you, when we did one study and we certain studies or certain techniques are so important that you have to publish it sooner, otherwise a meta-analysis comes up before you publish it, and again it becomes an issue because then it may not be accepted easily by good impacted journals and all. So that's why, or if you need a promotion and all, okay, promotion wise, or if you want to have an academic high grading in academics, so in that interviews and all, you need certain publications. So if you have short of time, then we may go for journals which provide a quick publication. So you have to see the journal's website whether they have a fast track submission for the original articles. And also most of the journals do mention about the average time for manuscript receipt to the first decision, either reject or entering the peer review. They just mention those timings. And also we have to look at how many issues per year the journals publish. For example, certain journals every year they come. Our IJPC, Indian Journal of Palliative Care, comes every quarterly. So it's very important to know, because if they come every monthly, or some journals like JAMA comes every weekly, so they take up many articles, and the chances of your publications getting faster are much higher. Step 3, you have to check for the journal scope, setup, reputation, and impact. So you have to see if does your paper meet the journal's requirement, the aims and objectives you have to check. Then the type of peer review system is used. Again, this is very important because the type of peer review is very important, because it is, you should know whether it is a blind review, you should know whether it is a double blind review, or whether it is an open review. Most of the journals websites not mention that whether which type of review system they use, but if you know it is well and good, so you know that the review system is very well taken care of, and your articles are not going to the biased reviewers. Then is the journal reputable or legitimate? Again, this is very important because I told you the predatory journals, so you have to be very important because they may charge. Certain journals which are reputable and legitimate, everything is crystal clear. I mentioned everything about on the journal's website about the processing fees, about the processing type, how much is the publication time, and all these things they properly list it up. So that's why it is very important to know. And what's the journal's impact? So again, I was telling you the journal high impact factor does not make any difference to your publication as long as it is an indexed journal. So that's what is important. Again, you have to know that the journal ranking system. So the journal ranking in terms of the H index. What is the H index of that particular journal? And if you go to the Google Scholar metrics, you can find out the journal H index or the H index score of that particular journal. So it is very important to know those things. And decide which journal best meets your requirement. After going through all these points, then you do it. So if you have a time, please scan the last few issues. This is very, very important of each journal and any supplement issues to see whether the similar papers of what we have done, the research have been published. So if they are published, then the chances of your research or your hypothesis to be considered as a novel idea won't be enough for that journal. Or in an opposite way, your findings may connect well with the recently published paper, and it could include a discussion of that in your paper. And At last, not but the least, if you happen to get rejected by your first choice of journal, you will have your shortlist ready for a quick submission to the next most suitable journal. Coming to my next perspective is plagiarism. So what is plagiarism? So it is an attempting to use the ideas, words, or work done earlier by someone else and without giving them due credit. This is known as plagiarism. It is very, very important and you should not neglect it, and it is completely considered as extremely unethical. So does that mean that you should not cite any other researcher's work in your articles? No, you can still cite as long as you do it ethically and you give them due credit. So how to do that? So how can we cite other researchers' work? So by clearly and completely acknowledging all the sources you have referred to while conducting your research or writing your paper. So that is very, very important. So there are 4 common types of plagiarisms. The most commonest is the deliberate plagiarism. It is very, very common. Accidental or unwitting plagiarism is not that very common. Self-plagiarism is again very common. And there is the 4th one is the mosaic plagiarism, which is also not very common. So coming to deliberate plagiarism, it occurs when you don't give due credit to the previously published work in your field and instead present this previous work as your own ideas. You don't credit the techniques you have used to conduct your research to the people who originally developed them, and you pass off the opinions and ideas of others as your own. Then this becomes a very deliberate plagiarism. Accidental or unwitting plagiarism occurs when you don't think that it is necessary to acknowledge the original author of a well-known fact. For example, global warming is causing climate change. So this is a very well-known fact, but still you have to give a proper acknowledgement to that author. You make a careless oversight or error while writing down references. And there is a cultural difference. For instance, junior researchers from certain cultures may feel that it is disrespectful to alter the words used by a senior researcher who is an authority in the field. There may be language problems. For example, if English is not your first language, then you may not interpret those terms properly and you try to copy it as it is. Then the original article is highly technically described, then again it is difficult for you to understand and you may not be able to properly unplagiarize it, and you try to put it in the same way what it has been presented. Self-plagiarism occurs when you republish one of your existing articles either in its entirety or you reuse portions of a previously written text while authoring new work. You combine your previously published papers to create a larger article or even a book without acknowledging the previous articles. So why can't you use text from your own published work? Because it is your work, you can use it, right? But there are certain issues. Important thing is that although you can quote text from your previous publications with relevant citations, a duplicate publication of previously reported data is very unethical. And if you engage in self-plagiarism, your new paper could be deemed as a redundant publication. This could also lead to copyright infringements. So it is very important you have to understand these things. Mosaic plagiarism occurs when you use words or phrases from a source document without enclosing the extracted text in quotes or setting it apart as a block quotation. Also, you attempt to replace words from the source document with synonyms without changing either the overall structure or the meaning of the original version. So then mosaic plagiarism occurs. It is very uncommon, not very common. Coming to, so before that, how to detect the plagiarism? So there are various ways by which we can detect plagiarism, and the most commonest software which is available in the market is iAuthenticated. If you put your entire article in that iAuthenticated, you will get a plagiarism report. Most of the most of the journals accept up to 15 to 25% of the plagiarism report. If it is more than that, they will reject it or they will try to send it back to you to recorrect it. So what will happen if you are found plagiarizing others' work? You could lose your tenure or funding. You could lose credibility in the academic community for the entire body of your work. Remember, don't take plagiarism lightly, and if a journal detects any plagiarism in your paper, regardless of your intent, you won't be absolved. My third perspective is salami slicing. So what is salami slicing? It refers to the practice of partitioning a large study that could have been reported in a single research article into small published articles. In other words, it means breaking up a single research paper into least publishable units and you publish it in 2-3 papers. So a set of papers are referred to as salami publications when more than one paper covers the same population, same methods and research question. Okay, we will come to that. So how to detect salami publication? There is no software application or algorithm for detection of salami publication. There are no objective ways to detect this sort of redundant publications. But manuscripts suspected of being salami publication often report on identical or similar sample size, hypothesis, research methodology and results, and very often have the same authors. So then it becomes a bit doubtful. So then you should think about that. So is salami publication always prohibited? No, not always, but there are certain situations when salami publications are redundant or redundant publication is allowed, where publication or professional guidelines in 2 or more different languages you are published. It is not considered a salami or duplicate publication when it is done with authors or publishers' consent. The authors must fully explain why which of the presented information is already published and why it is relevant to present it again in different context. And again, the final decision to publish such manuscript is with the journal editor, but the crucial point is the author's honesty and transparency. He has to always present the information and why it is relevant in the different context at present. So what is the problem with salami publication? It is unethical. Salami publications artificially enlarge the number of one author's scientific work and therefore give undeserved benefit to those authors in career advancement or project funding. Such misconduct abuses the editors, the reviewers and readers' time and valuable publishable space. This is very important, at the expense of another truly original article. And it has an outright influence on overall knowledge, which is the basis for clinical decision making, guidelines, professional recommendations, and so on. So that's why you should not do a salami publication. How to avoid? One conducted study should be reported in one article. That is an important thing. Like if you ask me how to avoid divorce, so don't marry. A second manuscript based on already published data should have a properly reference the previously published article. Besides citing the original article, you should clearly declare that is a part of an already published study. Emphasize all new knowledge added in the second manuscript. Not repeat any of the data which has been presented in the previous article, and give a detailed explanation to the journal's editor on all the above mentioned points, because transparency is very crucial. Never use the same control group for more than one study. Each control group must be representative to the tested group of a single study. So if you go by this example, a group of authors, listen very carefully, I will stress on certain points. A group of authors published results of a new biomarker used in the evaluation of inflammatory bowel disease therapy. Institutional Ethical Committee approved the study and all patients gave informed consent to the participate in the study. The sample size was small, so the authors correctly chose non-parametric statistical tests. The study revealed some interventions results worthy of further follow-up. Several years later, the same group of authors reported results on the same hypothesis, but with a different outcome and with no cross-reference to the earlier publication. So the studied patient population was much bigger, so they used appropriate parametric statistics and in the end gained a different study outcome. Are there any grounds for suspecting salami publications? So the answer is, there are legitimate reasons for suspecting salami publications. That is, the same group of authors published 2 articles with the same hypothesis. Okay. The fact that the author did not properly reference their previous work sets doubts on their good intention with no cross-reference, right? There is no limitation for publishing a follow-up study. See, there is no problem, but if hypothesis is same and they had not quoted the previous study, so this tells that they have doubted intentions. Okay, clear statement. And if you see, they already had a different study outcome, so it could have been a good study if they would have published with a good cross reference, or if they have provided the cross reference. So a clear statement of the type of the study, explanation of the differences between previous publication in the new one, and appropriate citation of the previous article would not have led into a salami slicing. All right, I hope I made these points very, very clear. So these are my references from where I took all my substance for making this presentation. Thank you very much. And for any queries, you can reach me on my mobile, which is very clearly written, or you can email me, or you can tweet me at @Raxto. Thank you very much.
Search and well, I really don't know whether it's a good news or a bad news, but there are no questions or comments in the chat. But nevertheless, I think since we have already reached the time, but I'm told by the organizers that there is going to be a break now, so we can take some time of that break to have some discussion. So if any of the presenters have any questions, otherwise I'll start asking the questions. And let me start with Catherine. If I can ask you, Catherine, this is a program for the Indian Association of Palliative Care. And I am one of the founder members, and I have seen the Indian Journal of Palliative Care starting from, like a newsletter to a very thin, pages, and now it's PubMed indexed, and Raghavendra is there carrying on so very well. But we have always struggled to get published in international journals. So, and one of the reasons has been the language and grammar. So I don't know whether I'm speaking the right language and grammar, but you can understand me. I hope so. You are in Lancaster, I'm in Leicester at the moment. But we find that as a big, drawback. And I mean, I'm a prolific writer, and I've had many papers rejected, and they've been very harsh just because of language. So how can some message to the Indian palliative care researchers, because we want our research to be known internationally, and so that is also not ethical, that we have only what we do is in Indian journals. We would like to, so some words of wisdom from you.
So what I would say is palliative medicine does consider itself to be an international journal, and we seek to publish papers from anywhere in the world that are relevant to our readership. And so the first thing I'd say is I would think that language is not a particular barrier. That's not the first thing we look at. So clearly, by the time something is published, we want it to be written well and smoothly and to be understandable. But our key question always before language is science. Have they asked the right question? Have they answered it with an appropriate research approach? And are their findings, novel? And by novel, I don't mean, groundbreaking. I mean, are they sufficient to add to knowledge for an international readership? So whilst the research might be conducted somewhere in India, the contextualization of it needs to be much broader. And I would say, I'm not talking here just about authors from India, but for all our authors, one of the main problems is that they only contextualize it for a national audience. So they start the introduction with policies and research from their own country, and they only discuss it with reference to research and policies and clinical practice in their own country. And what we're looking for is something much broader and contextualized. And then I don't care what country the original research has been done in, if it then adds to knowledge. Language, sometimes is an issue, but we'll work with authors on language. The message is much more important to me than the language. I mean, clearly, if the language is very poor, then we might send it back and say, can you do some work on the language before we send it out to reviewers, because reviewers are not editing it for language. But that's never the reason for us to turn something down. We turn things down usually on the basis of the science or on the novelty of the message. So I'd really encourage everyone from India to send things through to the journal. We're really interested in receiving it, but as has already been hinted, we only publish probably 15 to 20% of what is submitted to us. So for many people, the answer is no, sadly. But get those things right, and you're likely to be in the 20% that is published.
Yeah. Thank you very much, because I'm aware of that, because I'm myself an editor of the Journal of Psychosocial Rehabilitation, and this is by Springers. And I was told that, I have to bring a rejection rate of, 75 and 80%. My thing is that rehabilitation is a niche area. There is not much written about it. So I as an editor, I get very pained when I reject any paper, because every paper has some message or the other. It might not be a Nobel Prize winning message, but they all have some message. So, how does one go about that?
In terms of thinking about the message of the paper?
Yes. Well, if I ask you in a little different different way, would you like to consider having a section in your journal which might be, just brief reports, or where message is there, but it's not so detailed as the other things written, so that at least the message is not lost?
Yep, we do have other forms of publication. So we already have short reports, which are 1,400 words. So if somebody has something which is, perhaps some pilot work, feasibility study, a service evaluation, and we also offer a research letter format as well, which is 750 words. So again, there are some other ways of getting some of those messages across, rather than just an original article.
Thank you. Well, I'll come to the next presenter, but Raghavendra, I'll come to you in the end, because you are the editor of the IJPC. So before that, to Jennifer, and you also mentioned, and I think Catherine also mentioned, that we should present it as a story. So how do we write a good story?
Thank you for that.
The story should be good for you or for the reader?
Yeah, so I think, thank you for that question. And I think that my entire presentation was about writing the research story. And I would think here, when you write, you think about the person who is listening, is going to read your story. So as much as I would want to convey what I have done, unless it interests the reader, unless the reader is able to get a message out of it and actually retell the story, my story is not good. So I would want to preserve the work I have done. I would want to convey it, definitely, but always keeping the reader in mind. So that is why when we, one of the first steps was to identify the target journal and to know the audience. You want to know whether you're going to tell this message to the palliative care community or to primary care physicians. What is your message? Who should be the audience? And as you write, imagine someone reading through, and sometimes it's difficult to keep that perspective as you write. And that is when the pre-submission polishing and refinement can help you read over what you have written to see if that makes sense to somebody. And getting someone who is not a co-author, and maybe someone not even in your field, but in a related field, to read through it and get their comments will be extremely helpful.
Thank you. Rakesh, if I can ask you, you know that people are very preoccupied with the p-value, p less than 0.05 or 001. If it is not there, they get very upset. What would you like to tell people about that?
I think p-value is just a statistical tool when we say that something can happen by chance. That's it. It will not give you any clinical significance and does not have any clinical translational value. So that's why if you see last couple of years, we are looking more statistical part of it, say 95% confidence interval. So for example, say if I give an example for p-value, if you want to look for, say, the longevity of life after an intervention. So if it comes out, say 14 days plus minus 4 days, with a 15 days plus minus 4 days, p-value may be 0.01. But this longevity of 1 day is having some clinical significance for us. So we need to think two aspects. From statistical point of view, look for the 95% confidence interval to say that your intervention was different in two groups. So this is a statistical aspect. Second thing is clinical significance of it. So whatever the parameter difference are being got into two groups, are they having some clinical significance for you? And that's why p-value is many times overemphasized. So we should be cautious when we are not only publishing our data, but for critically appraisal of paper, because conclusion will say that technique A is much, much better than technique B because of highly significant p-value. But then if you review the data, it may not be so. So be cautious about the p-value.
Thank you. Raghu, if I can ask you, I know you talked about authorships, and I think it's a very important part that you talked about publishing ethics, and I think you covered everything. I would just like to add that potential writers should read about ICMJE guidelines. It is the International Committee of medical journals editors, which they have given things. But there is one problem which people have, and maybe you can throw some light on that. Most junior faculty, they are striving to be either the first author, second author, or corresponding author, because somehow in Indian academic circles, they give only importance to that. So how does, in a big team, you can have only one first author, how should they deal with it? Otherwise, their authorship is of no value.
Very relevant question, sir.
That's a very tricky point and a very tricky situation. Actually, there are many things to it, and I think you have been working in India and then been to UK. So there are many things to it. There is a hierarchical thing, that seniority levels and all. So that nowadays has been getting down. Now, but the most important thing is that whenever you propose one idea and one research, okay, so that idea and one research, ethically speaking, is a person who has every right to be a corresponding author. So that is what are the guidelines also, and ethically also, because that's the concept which has been emerged, though is not working at the root level. Okay, now coming to the first authorship. Okay, so the first authorship is nowadays what we see to it in our institute, and in many institutes I have been seeing it, is that the person who's working hard at the patient end, okay, taking their consents and getting the data and analyzing them, goes to them. So this is what should happen, and this is what is happening, but in a very slow-paced manner, I can understand. So coming to the part, the importance of these things is that in India, the first authorship carries a lot of meaning. Okay, they think that if you're a first author, then you are the boss. Okay, you are the leader. You are the conceptual person. It is wrong, which is not so. It is the corresponding author who is the most important person, and the last person, especially in the Western literature, if you see, even though the last person is not a corresponding author, people consider him as the important aspect of carrying out this study.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, ever since I became the senior most in my this thing, I would always prefer to be the last author. And I knew that, people would know that if I must have been involved in some way, and, I wouldn't go for the first authorship. But that caused different problems, because when they were thinking about my promotion, they said, how many first author papers you have? And I didn't have any.
Again, here, I don't know about what happens outside India, but in India, the most important thing is that either you need to be a first author, second author, or a corresponding author.
Or correspondent.
Yeah, that's it. So then you can have the seniority promotions and academically.
Raghavendra, you talked about methodology, and sometimes the people have such a big methodology. How is it possible to put, with limited word count, sometimes, as Catherine was saying, 1,500 words or 2,000 words? How does one, overcome simplifying writing methodology in a research paper?
I think the basis of writing up, as Dr. Jennifer did mention, it's not a full way of actually writing a full story itself. To be crisp and short. Now, if some things could be made with bullets and you could know saying that specifically this could be mentioned, I think you're saving a lot of words. Most of them start writing a long sentence. I think cutting those sentences is something which I would actually believe, and I'm a person who would like to read very short, crisp, and understand that. So I think word count is something which is not only applicable to method or methodology. It should actually start from the abstract and going down to the entire aspect. And when I am also reviewing papers for the first look itself, if the abstract is very long, then I will not be looking into the other aspects, because I will send it for, again, getting back to them and consider if they could actually cut down words. If it's beyond 3,000 for original article, then I would definitely not be considering it, because most of them will not be interested to read stories to be long. Absolutely. It should be precise and what they want. If the person who's actually the end reader will actually think saying that they're making a lot of fuss over here, or is it too lengthy and they lose interest in reading it, then it's of no serves no value or purpose at all. So therefore it has to be short, and I would actually tell them saying that use the headings and use the bullets. So bullets would actually get to a lot of understanding, and most of the reviewers who are reviewing multiple articles or manuscripts will understand that easily. You don't require to write it in a full sentence form is what I would actually suggest.
No,
thank you.
Again,
there is
sum it up. No. Regarding that point about the words and all, sometimes I find it that there is a crispiness in the discussion. You will find the discussion is only 200 or 300 words or 400, 500 words. But if you see the results, it will be 1,000 word results. So again, I feel that matters a lot, because I think we need to stress more. The crispiness should be more towards the discussion rather than.
Right. Thank you. There is one question.
We have a question in the chat, sir. Yes.
There is one question in the chat which I can probably ask anyone, but I would. So can we include a reported case in a case series
again?
You can't use it, okay, because it becomes a duplication of the data. Yes, you can.
No, but
you can quote it
if they give it as a reference.
Yes, you can quote it. That's what I'm saying. You can cite it or you can refer it, but you can't use that entire case
as a
series in that series.
Yes.
Suppose if there are 10 cases, that previous case report you can't put it as a 9th case or a
10th case. Yes.
Yeah. So Pooja, you will have to tell when we have to stop. Otherwise, we'll like writers and authors, we'll keep writing.
No, but then this is such a comprehensive and such an informative session. I'm really thankful for Dr. Anjum to actually helping me out to participate and moderate this session, and especially Dr. Santosh sir, who actually thought of crispy questions to actually figure out what to ask, making it a gist of the session of every speaker, I believe. So thank you, sir. And thank you all the eminent faculties. I think we should give 10 minutes break to other participants as well, because it's already 7:50. I think it's endless, but I think we need to end at some point of time. So let me just give a vote of thanks to all the faculty and chairman and all two of the chairmen to actually bring out time. I'm sure it was a tough time for a few of the speakers. We feel sorry for them to actually again and again call. I was very rude to them, I believe, to again and again call them to get their session done. But thank you so much. Thank you once again.
As a moderator, I would say it was a fantastic organization. I think at all levels they supported us and they understood what we were going through. That's what I would actually tell them in consensus. And all the talks were actually on time, very sharp, and what has to be spoken, I think that's exactly what's spoken. So I thank all the panelists as well as the chairpersons. Thank you all.
Thank you everyone.
Very good night to all the faculty members, and very good evening to Catherine ma'am.
And to me also.
And to you also, sir. Yes, sir.